I'm Teisha with Shalom TV's news update for Friday, March the 21st, 2014. The IDF announced today that they uncovered a massive terror tunnel earlier this week between Gaza and southern Israel, calling it the largest one of its kind to date. The tunnel is 20 meters deep, or about 65 feet deep in some areas, and hundreds of meters long, maybe over 1,000 feet. It is lined with cement on the inside. The Army said the IDF sees the tunnel as an attack on Israeli sovereignty and a clear violation of agreements reached in Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012, adding that Hamas bore responsibility for the tunnel. Terror tunnels such as the one found this week are designed for the kidnapping of soldiers or other attacks on Israel. Hamas, meanwhile, denied the reports of the new tunnel, claiming last night that the tunnel was an old one previously found by the IDF, rejecting that there was any, quote, military achievement by the enemy. The Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, announced yesterday that they now know what happened to 8 Iranian Jews who disappeared 20 years ago. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office released a statement last night that the Mossad has been tracking 11 Iranian Jews who fled Iran in 4 separate groups in 1994 and in 1997 in hopes of reaching Israel, but never made it. The families have remained hopeful over the decades that their loved ones were perhaps kidnapped and were still being held by other countries. However, the Mossad said they had reliable information that the 8 who vanished in 1994 had been murdered. There was no further details on the murders, and Mossad was still investigating the fate of the other 3 Iranian Jews who fled in 1997. The 8 Jews who were killed were 17-year-old Babak Shaulian Tehrani, 19-year-old Shahin Niku, 21-year-old Salari Bezad, 22-year-old Farad Ezati Mahmoudi, 41-year-old Humayun Balazaid, 17-year-old Omid Saluki, 17-year-old Ruben Mosleh, and 16-year-old Ibrahim Cohen Mosleh. Veteran Mossad official David Maidan met with the families of the missing 8 yesterday to inform them of the agency's findings. Maidan said this is an issue that has preoccupied the intelligence agencies for over 20 years, and today we can say that the mystery has come to its end. Prime Minister Netanyahu extended his condolences to the families, saying he hoped there was some comfort in knowing their fate. Iran's supreme leader is once again voicing his Holocaust denial in an event marking the Persian New Year, Nowruz. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei slammed Western attempts that prohibit Holocaust denial. He said, "Does anybody dare talk about Holocaust? In Europe, the Holocaust is an event whose reality is uncertain, and if it happened, it's uncertain how it happened." In his New Year's speech, Khamenei also addressed the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, where he accused the United States and Israel of conspiring to drive the Palestinians out of the region. Iran's official press TV quoted Khamenei as saying the U.S. has failed in Palestine. They devised a scheme against Palestine and spared no efforts in carrying it out. The U.S. Ambassador for Global Women's Issues is traveling to the Middle East this weekend to address several issues, including the role of women in the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. Ambassador Catherine Russell will make stops in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Nazareth, and Ramallah beginning tomorrow, March the 22nd, on a 4-day trip where she will meet with Israeli and Palestinian women to discuss the important role and stake that women have in the peace process and their support of advancing it. Israel's Air Force has acquired a new fighter jet for training purposes. The Italian-made Lavi was unveiled yesterday at the plane's production plant in the city of Varese. A delegation from Israel's Ministry of Defense attended the ceremony in Italy. The IAF had signed a deal with Italian company Armaci in 2012 for 30 Lavis. They will replace the current training plane used by the Air Force, the Skyhawk. IDF Brigadier General Shmuel Zucker said the new plane will advance Israel's future pilots to a new level, training them for the next generation of aircraft in the Air Force. B'nai B'rith International condemned the divestment vote earlier this week made by the Student Senate at Loyola University in Chicago, calling it a clear and concerted effort to demonize and delegitimize the State of Israel. As we reported to you yesterday, the student government voted on a resolution calling for the school to divest from 8 companies that do business with Israel regarding equipment used in the West Bank. B'nai B'rith said yesterday that the unanimous vote in favor of the resolution, organized by the Students for Justice in Palestine, says more about the voters than about Israel. They said the vicious ongoing campaign by anti-Israel activists in the Boycotts, Divestment and Sanctions, or BDS movement, singles out Israel for isolation from the international community. Israel's status as a bastion of academic freedom, as a democracy in a sea of unrest, and as a medical, agricultural, and technological wonder is ignored by a Hippocratic community which disregards serious issues in the region to focus attention on Israel. And in Europe, some voices against the BDS movement. In two separate statements this week, the federal government of Switzerland and the Parliament of the Netherlands condemned boycotts of Israel. The Federal Council in Switzerland said on Monday that it is of the opinion that urging organizations or people to commit to a commercial boycott is not a constructive measure. This was in response to a lawmaker from Zurich, Fair Hans, who raised the issue after Swiss Green Party members urged a boycott of Israel. Hans said the calls reminded him of boycotts of Jewish shops during the Holocaust. And on Tuesday, the Dutch lower house passed a motion calling on the government to indicate in a visible and convincing way that it encourages relations between Dutch and Israeli businesses and institutions. Because, quote, economic cooperation promotes peace, security, and stability in the region. The motion in favor of financial ties with Israel passed by a majority of 115 out of 150 votes. It had been submitted by lawmakers of the Reformed Political Party and the Christian Union after reports that the Dutch Foreign Ministry had advised local companies to stop cooperating with Israeli businesses because of their involvement in projects in the West Bank. Just this past December, Dutch water company Vitens dropped its joint project with Israeli water company Mekorot because of Mekorot's operations in East Jerusalem. The Associated Press reports that the Prime Minister of Japan will visit the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam this weekend as a gesture of respect and regret after the recent vandalism of hundreds of copies of the Diary of Anne Frank across Tokyo last month. This according to a Japanese official who said that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will visit the museum this Sunday before he makes his way to The Hague for the Nuclear Security Summit. A group of artists visiting Israel were given a blank canvas outside of the Knesset to leave their mark on the site. 6 top female graffiti artists from Artists for Israel painted graffiti outside the Parliament building, leaving what they called a little youthful color to the proceedings of the government. Earlier in their trip, they led art therapy classes for preschoolers in Ashdod and visited and painted a bomb shelter there. They also visited an old Jordanian camp in the Jordan Valley and painted a new artist colony being established in the area. The group's executive director, Craig Dershowitz, said, "We supported a new community of Israeli artists and turned ugly reminders of war into canvases." He said, "We want to increase understanding of Israel as a place with artistic and cultural freedom." An 82-year-old Holocaust survivor will be making his debut as a composer this weekend. The Jewish Week reports that Harry Baylor's opera Masada will see its world premiere this weekend in New York as part of a Jewish Music Month program of the UJA Federation of New York. Baylor was born in Poland, surviving the Nazi occupation there by hiding on a farm with one of his sisters. His parents and 3 other siblings were killed by the Nazis. Baylor and his sister emigrated to the U.S. and made their way to Brooklyn, where Baylor later studied at the Brooklyn Conservatory of Music. Masada debuts at the JCC in Staten Island this Sunday. And that's Shalom TV's news update for Friday, March the 21st, 2014. Remember, live Shabbat services are coming up at 6 o'clock from New York City's Central Synagogue. I'm Teisha Bader. Shabbat Shalom.